Matewan, West Virginia, May 19th, 1920. Police Chief Sid Hatfield stands waiting near a railroad station. 12 deputized men surround the area. Earlier that day, agents from the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency unlawfully evicted several coal miners, and Hatfield is determined to have a word with their leader, Albert Felts. Felts and his 13 agents arrive on foot, planning to board a train, but Hatfield blocks their path as his deputies close in, meeting them in front of a hardware store. When Hatfield tells Felts that he and his men are under arrest, Felts claims that he possesses a warrant to arrest Hatfield. They both know Felts is lying and share a dark laugh. The town's mayor, also on site, asks to see Felts' warrant for the evictions. Felts produces a paper. The mayor, examining it, sees that it's bogus and says so. Felts then produces his gun. And what happens next triggers the largest American uprising since the Civil War, the Battle of Blair Mountain. Thanks so much to HelloFresh for continuing to help us bring history to the table. To understand how the Matewan massacre led to the much larger Battle of Blair Mountain, one must look roughly 30 years before the incident and follow a trail of corporate greed and exploitation perpetrated by the United States coal industry. Though surprisingly, it doesn't start with the coal companies, but with the railroad combines that not only needed the coal to run their engines, but had the means to go into towns throughout the country and corner the market. Now, commercial coal mining started in the U.S. as early as 1701. And by the 1880s, many who needed to subsidize their household income, from local white farmers to European immigrants to African Americans, had settled near the West Virginia coal mines. But in the 1890s, well-heeled developers financed by the railroad companies showed up in Mingo County, where Matewan was located, looking to buy up as much land as possible. It wasn't just the land they were after, but the mineral rights. And once the necessary purchases were made, in came the construction crews. 5,000 strong, they performed the arduous task of chiseling 8 tunnels into the Appalachian foothills, giving the financiers full access to the black gold they had come for. Of course, in order to run a successful mining operation, the company had to lay down miles of railroad line and build roughly 60 bridges to transport the coal out, though despite the cost, it would prove to be a worthwhile investment. That's because the coal companies, already benefiting from American industrialization, would see even greater gains during World War I. Even before joining the war, the U.S. exported coal to its European allies. But when the war ended, so did that increased demand. And when companies like Stone Mountain Coal Camp saw a loss in profits, their first move was to squeeze their workers. Stuck in the middle of this ebb and flow were the coal miners themselves. In their haste to put food on the table for their families, they collectively put themselves in a situation that made them practically indentured servants. This is how it worked. Once you signed on to join a mining outfit, you were provided with appropriate clothes, supplies, and even housing for you and your family. Sounds like a great deal, right? Except for the fact your supplies were leased from the company, and a fee for them came out of your pay. Also, the company store that you and your family bought provisions from, usually the only store in town, would often charge whatever they wanted. And worse still, instead of money, mining companies would issue scrip instead of actual pay that could only be spent in the company store. And keep in mind, coal mining itself is neither the easiest nor the safest job one could have. You're literally working in a cave, deep underground, chipping away at veins of coal. And if someone gets careless with one of the lamps, a single spark could ignite the ambient dust, causing the entire mine to explode. In fact, one such incident killed 362 miners in Monongah, West Virginia in 1907, a mere 13 years before the events we're covering today. Now you'd think that because this dangerous work was essential to the economy, someone would actually advocate for these working class men. Perhaps someone at the federal, state, or heck, even local levels. But in most cases, you'd be wrong. Even in West Virginia, Governor John J. Cornwell, who had only one office in 1916 due to coal miner support, seemed reluctant to run afoul of the mining companies. In fact, when 5,000 angry miners rose up in nearby Logan County, he called the White House and requested federal troops to put down the uprising. As for the mining companies themselves, they had their ways of maintaining order. From subsidizing police forces like the one in Logan to flat-out bribing officials. They'd also employ men from the Baldwin Felts Company who, along with the on-the-take local law enforcement, would supervise activity within the mines. These security officers occasionally roughed up miners to remind them who was boss and suppressed anything that resembled unionizing. Despite the mining company's use of threats and hired goons, representatives from the United Mine Workers of America showed up anyway. though they didn't exactly walk into town announcing themselves, for that would have prompted a quick and, more often than not, violent response from the Baldwin Felts agents. Instead, they'd usually sneak into town, pretending to be a salesman of some sort, quietly engaging miners on the sly until someone either listened to them, or they were found out and escorted out of town, or chased out, or beaten and told to leave. The Union leaders from the UMW realized that if the prosperous mines of West Virginia's southern border remained non-Union, the situation would have an adverse effect on the Union's collective bargaining power in that region. But unionizing was a tough sell for most of the miners of Matewan. Many had been taught to distrust unions, either from company-produced literature or company-friendly preachers, which tended to claim all labor unions and their members were communists. And bear in mind, this was at a time when labor strikes across the country commonly devolved into street brawls or worse, meaning participating could be dangerous. African-American miners were particularly reluctant to get themselves caught in any union talk, long resolved that there would never be any real upward mobility for them. They also knew that they were still better off than they had been as sharecroppers in the Jim Crow South. And the European migrants, well, they were pretty much under the same impression, given that they had no intention to return to their native lands. But the Matewan miners eventually did go union and launched a strike after an empty gesture wage increase that just so happened to coincide with a price hike at the company store, a tactic that left the miners with very little money. And it's worth mentioning here that despite the lingering racism and xenophobia of the time, all the miners stood together, black and white, native-born and immigrant, all united to seek fair pay and safer work conditions. And that's when the terrorizing started. First came the evictions from company-owned housing, which was to be expected, so most of the displaced miners created a tent compound a few miles away from their abandoned houses, where they hunted small game and scavenged for food. And though a small emergency fund from the Union arrived, it was hardly enough for such a large group. Next, Baldwin Felts agents took to strafing the tents with machine gun fire. Scared and injured, but not broken, the mining families nursed their wounded and stood their ground. And that's when the Stone Mountain Coal Corporation sent Baldwin Felts agents to buy off Matewan's local politicians, as they'd done in other places. Except this time, it didn't work. Mayor Cobell Testerman was offered a bribe, hand-delivered by Albert Felts, the brother of one of the Baldwin Felts founders. Felts wanted to station machine guns on the various roofs about the town, but out of loyalty to the mining community, Testerman refused the bribe. And so did Police Chief Sid Hatfield, a former miner known for his carousing, his marksmanship, and his being related to the Hatfield side of the Hatfield-McCoy feud. He made it his mission to thwart the Baldwin Felts agents during the months prior to the confrontation, often coming to the aid of coal miners and their families as they were being evicted. Hatfield even enlisted Sheriff George Blankenship, who helped slow the evictions to a crawl by arresting agents and tying evictions up in court. All this fueled a simmering animosity between the two factions, which spurred Felts to draw his gun during the railroad standoff. Gun blasts ring out, one after another. Felts shoots Testerman, Hatfield shoots Felts. Arrogance allowed the agents to get caught off guard, and the deputized miners, with their weapons mostly ready, take the advantage. When the smoke clears, 10 men are dead. Mayor Testerman, 2 miners, and 7 Baldwin Felts detectives, including Albert Felts and his brother Lee. It was the first time the miners had clocked a win against Baldwin Felts. But if the Union men of Matewan thought that the shooting was done, they were dead wrong. And we'll tell you all about the Battle of Blair Mountain proper next episode. Oh man, Zoe, I am chomping at the bit to tell the second half of the story next week. But until then, we do have to start thinking about what's for dinner. Thanks, HelloFresh. Time to get cooking. HelloFresh is a tasty meal kit delivery service that's been saving me a ton of time this fall, while also helping me avoid stressful meal planning and expensive trips to the grocery store when I'm hangry. Because you wouldn't like me when I'm hangry. Sorry, don't know what came over me. I get everything I need to prepare awesome home-cooked meals delivered right to my door, and I'm eating in a half hour or less. Plus, with over 30 recipes and tons of tasty add-on options available each week, finding your favorite is a breeze. Want to go vegetarian, pescatarian, or fit in wholesome meals? They got you covered on all that. Whereas I went the more meaty route yet again and just cooked up their crispy Parmesan chicken, which, no joke, I think was my absolute favorite HelloFresh meal I've had thus far. Oh man, it was so good. But because some of us have more, let's say, picky eaters in their families, Jeff whipped up their time-honored crowd-pleaser turkey ragu spaghetti, which got 0 complaints from his son or his expected unexpected guests. Oh, and another thing that HelloFresh gets right is their continued work on the sustainability and freshness fronts. Their produce goes from the farm to your front door in under a week. The ingredients are pre-portioned, meaning less food waste when compared to grocery shopping. And HelloFresh is the first carbon-neutral meal kit company, which we really love to see. And since summer's over and everybody's schedules are getting hectic again, now is the perfect time to save some time and try HelloFresh yourself with this delectable deal. All you gotta do is go to HelloFresh.com and use the code ExtraCredit16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts plus free shipping. That's right, busy people. You can get free food while supporting the content you love, the environment, and your grumbly tummy. Again, that's 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts at HelloFresh.com using the code ExtraCredit16. Your time and taste buds will thank you, and once again, so will we. Thanks so much, everybody. A hearty thanks of legend to Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Angelo Valenciana, Arclight Games, Casey Muscha, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, and Skylar Holmes.